Okay, so we're keep continuing on our journey of discovery in the book of Genesis, discovering the mysteries of Genesis, and the outline is found in this booklet, Why? The Mysteries of Genesis. And that title comes from an understanding of how these stories evolved over centuries as they were wandering through the wilderness. They were nomads, and they were picking up stories that they'd gotten from different places, whether it was in Egypt or in Babylonia, or Samaria. That these stories grew and to the point where when they were finally written down, that they had developed into a new version, if you will. So much of what we find, last time we talked about chapter 1, which is the 7 days of creation, and I actually looked at it as two creation stories. It's the spiritual creation, where the spirit is moving, the earth is without form and void, and the spirit moves. So we have the beginning of the possibility for creation, which is the movement. Nothing changes if nothing changes. So you have to create of movement. And then what happens? Well, then there's a mental creation. There's a movement in mind where God says, let there be light, let there be a firmament, let there be seed-bearing plants, etc., etc., etc. And it's an evolutionary journey. Now, it doesn't make a lot of sense physically, and that's why a lot of people, when we start saying, well, this, it shows an evolution, that this 7 steps is an evolutionary journey, and the scientists will say, well, how can you have, seed-bearing plants before you have the sun and the moon? And it's not a physical evolution. We're still talking about the evolution of an idea in mind. It's a mental evolution. First, you have to have the light. Let there be light. There has to be illumination, understanding, etc., etc. And so we have the 7 days of creation is how we create. It's the mental level of creation where we bring something from nothing into something. It's the law of mind action, if you will. It's the creative process where we have to have the illumination, have to have the idea, and then have to wrap it in faith and bring forth the imagination and the wisdom and the love and et cetera, in order to finally express it out. And in the second chapter, at the end of this, the first part of the second chapter is the 7th day. And on the 7th day, God finished his work. So I think of it in terms of completion. Most people think of it as a day of rest. Well, it says he finished his work and then he rested. So it's a bringing to completion. And then we have at the beginning of chapter 2, verse 4, and some people say 4b. If you look at verse 2, it begins that these are the generations. These are the generations of the heavens and the earth when they were created. That is the end of the first creation, if you will. And then it goes on into what we call 2:4b, chapter 2, verse 4, section B, the second part of it. In the day that the Lord God made the earth and the heavens. Well, it could be relating back to the 7 days. But what we find out is, scholarly wise, here we have the Lord God. And in the first chapter, we had God. God said, let there be light. And in the second chapter, it's Lord God. Now, that doesn't seem like it's a big difference, except for when you look at the words that are used. In the first chapter, it's Elohim. And in the second chapter, it's Yahweh. Or in the German, they use the word Jehovah. Yahweh. And Yahweh is the self-existent one. I am that I am. Tell them that I am has sent you. It's YHWH. In the ancient Hebrew, I am that I am, Yahweh. The self-existent one. So what we have is, in the first chapter, we have the absolute God creating creation, creating the spiritual creation, which is setting the stage for the mental creation, which is the 7 days of creation. And then we have that absolute God embodying creation with the power of creation. And so Yahweh is that immanent. So we have the transcendent God, the Elohim, and we have the immanent God, the Yahweh. We have the absolute and the relative, that there is, in the 7 days, at the end of the sixth day, God looked at everything he had made and said it was very good. So in the absolute sense, it's all good. Even the tree of the knowledge of good and evil that's planted in the garden. It's all good. So then the second chapter, we have Yahweh, the immanent one, the self-existent one, that is pressing out into existence. So we have in verse 7, chapter 2, where it says that the Lord God formed man of dust from the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living being. That God breathed into it the breath of life, and we are living beings. The God is as close to us as the breath that we breathe, the life that we live. That Yahweh. Now in unity circles, we equate Yahweh with the Christ. That is the spiritual man, if you will. In the materials, the pamphlet talks about the second chapter, introduces us to another understanding God as Lord. In the day, and go back to that 2:4, in the day that the Lord God made the earth and the heavens. This is Jehovah, or Lord God. Jehovah God executes what Elohim God created or ideated. That's from the lesson, Let There Be Light, and Elizabeth Sand Turner's book that goes along with this. That Jehovah God executes what Elohim God created or ideated. So the Elohim God is, like I was saying, is the absolute transcendent God, and that Yahweh, or Jehovah, is the immanent, expressive God. Jehovah means the self-existent one, I am who I am, but it also includes an element of becoming, to make known. He is the self-existent one who reveals himself. In the Mysteries of Genesis, Charles Fillmore, co-founder of Unity, the allegory of the Garden of Eden of the man and the woman and the serpent represents the development of ideas in individual consciousness, not the development of a planetary system, which is the first chapter. Right? It's the development of ideas in individual consciousness. The latter is the narrow conclusion of the casual observer. Creation is the evolution of ideas in mind. Creation is the development of individuality. Hence, the one object of all creative processes is the making of man. It's the evolution of ideas. So we have the development of the idea for creation, and now we have the expression of that idea. And we'll notice that it's two different creation stories. In the first story, we have the let there be light, there will be a firmament, there will be plant-bearing seeds, etc., etc. And in the second one, God creates man first, and then he plants a garden and puts man in it. In the garden, in the allegory, and we use that term allegory, the Apostle Paul, talking about Sarah and Hagar, says that such things are an allegory. He's talking about a story that we'll be talking about a little later in the book of Genesis. That such things are an allegory. In other words, another word for allegory is metaphor or parable. These are metaphorical stories. In Unity, we call them metaphysical, above and beyond the physical, that they're teaching a lesson that's above and beyond the physical. But Paul used the word allegory.
They're like a fairy tale. Right?
They're a myth. They're a fairy tale. They're a teaching story. Right. They're a teaching story, and that's what. And so we take these symbolic stories and apply them to ourselves, and that's what the basic idea of Unity metaphysics is all about, is looking at it not as just his story, the story of God working in and through and as creation, but our story of our soul unfoldment. And this is where we're being born into physicality. It's, as I say in here somewhere, I'll just go ahead and read this. The first chapter introduced spiritual and mental creation, and now we have the resultant expression or of physical creation. All of physicality began as unformed potential, was shaped and formed into ideas and then pressed out into existence through the power of the mind. This process, which is presented in metaphorical terms, is practiced by each and every one of us daily. Our work is to awaken to the process and become conscious co-creators with the infinite creative power that is God. That's our job, is to become awake. Right? That's what the name Buddha literally means the awakened one or the enlightened one. And the Christ is the anointed one coming from Mashiach. That which is called to lead us. So we're awakening to that conscious awareness of God leading us, of the God within, leading us to a higher realization of life and of living. Back to the mysteries of Genesis, Charles says, the limited concept of Jehovah God caused a deep sleep to fall on the man. Now remember when he's in the garden and God says to him, you need a helper. He planted the garden, and it was Adam's job to tend the garden. And so then he brings to him all these animals, to be helpers. And he creates all these animals, and then he couldn't find a perfect helper. And one of the, out of all these animals, so then he says, I will make woman, of man. Make you a woman of man. And what he does is he causes him to go to sleep. He puts him to sleep. And then one of the things that we put him to sleep, right? He never wakes him up. It never says that he wakes him up. So really, the rest of it is all a dream. We're in the dream state that we are separate from God. We're living the dream, exactly. So a limited concept of Jehovah God caused a deep sleep or mesmeric state to fall on mad Adam. Nowhere in the scriptures is there any record to show that Adam was ever fully awakened, and man is still partly in this dreamlike state of consciousness. In this state, he creates a world of his own and peoples it with ideas corresponding to his own sleep-benumbed consciousness. So that's one of the understandings that we have about this story, is it's saying that we are in a sleep state and we are dreaming this creative expression out here, that we are asleep to the truth of us.
I don't think any Baptist ministers
Although we do have a state of awakening that happens, and we'll get to that in a minute. The major event of this story is the eating of the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. It never says that there's an apple. It says the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And for brevity's sake and the tongue twister that is, I'll just say fruit. And I go on to say that it's the fruit eating of the knowledge of the fruit and the banishment from Eden. Eden is analogous to the womb. Assuming the preborn is properly nourished, etc., its environment is totally nurturing. It is unaware of the unpleasantries of cold and bright lights, etc. Once it is born into the outside existence, it is subject to the elements which can be unpleasant. By taking its step out into the brave new world of existence, it has eaten the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. It now experiences that which it likes and finds pleasant, and is labeled good, and that which it doesn't like and is unpleasant, which is labeled bad or evil. Now, one of my favorite quotes is from Hamlet. Nothing is good or bad, but thinking makes it so. And even though that's not, adopted by most biblical scholars as being, I see it. The Seth book says that as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you read Seth.
And it's just so true that nothing is good or bad, but thinking makes it so. As a man thinketh, so is he.
Well, Buddha said that too.
Mm-hmm.
In a certain way. I don't remember exactly how, but.
Exactly. That's the whole point. I've been reading Wan Tzu again, and Lao Tzu says basically the same thing, that whatever we call it is what it is, and that's what it says in the book of Genesis. Is he's naming the animals. What are the animals? The animals are our unregenerated life forces. So that those parts of us that are waiting to be expressed, and as we express them, we name them, and whatever we name them, they become. It says that whatever he named them, they became. He didn't name them what they were. He named them what they became. So whatever we name our experiences, right? And one of the great stories, examples I like to show is how many times have we gone to a play or a concert or some sort of a experience, whether it's a Sunday service, and you come away and say, oh, gee, the lighting, the acting, the presentation, the music, oh, that was so wonderful. Wasn't that just a great thing? And your partner goes, oh, that sucked. I didn't like it at all. Couldn't, they couldn't remember their lines. They were all miscued, whatever. It's the same experience. One names it good, one names it bad.
Yeah.
What is it? Well, it is what it is, and it's not what it's not.
It all depends on your.
That's Lao Tzu. Wan Tzu. I was just reading some Wan Tzu yesterday. What is and what isn't. And that's as far as we can go. When we start saying good or bad, then that's our own judgment faculty kicking in. That we are judging things. The truth is, it is all good. Another quote from Charles. It says, good and evil primarily represent the two poles of being, are opposite but not adverse to each other. We normally think of them as being opposites, good and bad. Their two poles of being are opposite but not adverse to each other. I like that idea to think of. Right? Good is not the opposite of bad, but a relative concept of each other. That there is only good. Just like there is only light and there is only heat. And cold is just a relative expression of heat. Right?
He's got his eyes looking up.
Cold is a relative expression of heat, and darkness is a relative expression of light. The truth is, there's always light. I've been in absolutely dark rooms with no windows.
In a cave.
And if you sit there long enough, you begin to see things, because there is a certain element of light in every atom and every molecule. That is,
Yeah, there's energy.
darkness, and and cold is relative. Absolute zero is like 400 something Kelvin, and there's nothing that is absolute zero. There is heat everywhere in the universe. It's just colder than we can handle. We all make our choices. Some of us live in Florida, some of us live in Alaska. We all make our choices, or Michigan, somewhere in between. We make our choices of what relative heat that we can handle for our bodies. But the truth is, nothing is absolute bad. It's all a relative expression of good. And it changes with how we, we can look back and...
Sometimes you think it's horrible.
Yeah, sometimes you like it, sometimes you think it's horrible.
Yes.
Sometimes we go through an experience and it's the worst thing that ever happened in our lives, like losing a job or a relationship. 20 years later, we look back and say, gee, if I hadn't have had that experience, I wouldn't be where I am today. So what is it?
Sometimes you seek death, and sometimes you fight it.
Sometimes you seek death, and sometimes you fight it. That's right.
Yeah.
So one thing I wanted to talk about, because these stories were not created in a bubble, did not come out of whole cloth, if you will. And there are examples.
Together,
Yeah, there are examples of ancient philosophies, if you will, ancient cultures. That these studies come out of the Sumerian culture. The Dilmun was basically a paradise, if you will. That was the Greek word. Is it Greek? Anyway, Persian. It's a Persian term, borrowed by the Hebrews, and wasn't used to talk about Eden until I think it was, what was his name, Dante's Inferno and Paradosio. The Inferno talks about hell, and Paradosio talks about it's the Divine Comedy. Paradosio, he used that phrase to talk about heaven, if you will, and that started getting addressed to Eden being a paradise. It's the Garden of Hesperides in Greek mythology is similar to the Garden of Eden. That dates back, 1,000 years before this story of the Garden of Eden would have been generated. Goes back to 3500 BCE, before the Common Era, and it included a feminine essence, if you will. The nymphs of the West were located in the Garden of Hesperides. And it comes out of a multi-theo culture. So what happened is in the Hebrews, in the Israelites, they deciphered these stories that came out of Greek and Egyptian and Sumerian and Assyrian and other cultures, and deciphered them down into a story that talked about the one God, whether it be Elohim or Yahweh. Yahweh being the immanent God, Elohim being the absolute God, the two names for God that come through in the Old Testament. And it doesn't. There's not two different gods. It's just two different ways of understanding God, as that which is the absolute and that which is the immanent, as you will. The first God, when the spirit of the waters, the spirit moved over the waters. The word is neshama, and when God breathes into the man that was created from the dust, the word is ruach, and both of these are interpreted as both breath and spirit. And so in both cases, so we have the absolute God creating that spiritual potential through the neshama, and the immanent God empowering creation or expressing through creation with the ruach, the spirit in creation. And in that, one of the things we talk about is the 4 rivers that were in the Garden of Eden, and how 2 of them have no basis in, there's Pishon and, Pishon and Iphon, I believe it is. And the 2 of them, or Gihon, that's what it is, Gihon and Pishon. And then there's the Tigris and the Euphrates. The Tigris and Euphrates exist, come in the Mesopotamian valley there, out of which the Mesopotamian culture, which really is the birthplace of all Western culture, Mesopotamia, and the Sumerians and the Assyrians and everybody kind of come out of that, and the Greeks, cultures, etc., evolved from Mesopotamia. And so this brings us, this is a Mesopotamian story, and the first two represent the spiritual and the mental, and the Tigris and the Euphrates. Tigris is the emotional or feeling nature, and the Euphrates is the expressive or physical nature. So we have this beginning, this symbology that in the 20th century we have created psychological frameworks around the 4 functions of consciousness. It's talking about these things back 3,500 years ago, is symbolically. Now, if you look at the names and see how they, what they represent, you can see how this is showing that creative process. One of the ways we talk about the creative process: mind, idea, expression, spiritual, mental, physical, spiritual, mental, physical, and the mental includes both the thinking and the feeling natures. And so when the thinking is turned towards the spirit and draws forth its ideas from spirit and empowers that with the emotional or feeling nature, then we have the divine expression out into the earthly plane. And when we talk about Christmas, I talk about how the Christmas story is a redemption of the Garden of Eden story, because both Adam and Eve listened to the angel, the spirit, and conceived and bore the child, Jesus, the spirit, that pure spiritual expression in this life wave that he symbolizes. Now in the Garden of Eden story, we have the feeling nature, Eve, being seduced by sense wisdom, the snake, the serpent, to eat of the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, even though they've been told by spirit, even though they're not following the direction of spirit. And she seduces the thinking nature into taking a bite as well. And then what happens? Then they become aware of themselves as beings. They hear God walking through the forest or through the garden, and I think God must be a pretty big guy if they hear him walking, boom, 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 and they hide themselves, and it says, Adam, Adam, where are you? And then I always think that's kind of a crazy omnipotent and omniscient, all-knowing, all-seeing kind of God who can't find Adam in the garden,
Yeah.
you know? And it's just a story, right? It's just a story, but it has a spiritual meaning, right? It's an allegory, it's a parable, it's metaphor, and so we metaphysically interpret it. But when I talk to other people who are, metaphysical, you're doing that woo-woo stuff, well, I talk about metaphor. These are parts of speech: metaphor, allegory, parable, that have a spiritual. These are earthly stories with heavenly meanings. So we look at these stories and what does that mean for us? Well, at the beginning of the story it says, "Do not eat of the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, for in that day you shall surely die." Now I know the story. They eat of the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and they don't die. So that makes God a liar, right? God was lying to him.
He didn't mean that. He meant he was kicking them out.
It was metaphorical, allegorical. It was a parable. They will not die physically, because life does not begin or end with death, with what we call death, with this physical body. But what they did died to their innocence. They died to themselves as that's why they put on clothes. Right? They were naked. They saw they were naked. They were no longer innocent. It's like children, Children, they'll run around naked all the time. Until enough adults, chastise them and make them put clothes on, they start thinking there's something wrong with running around naked. And, it's an innocence that they died to. And we can think of ourselves, and when we die to that innocence, what happens? Well, we're awakened to ourselves as spiritual beings, as growing beings, and this is the beginning point, as I say in this material here, that it's the beginning of our journey toward conscious awareness of our unity with God, Spirit, the source of existence. We call it a fall. And nowhere in the text does it say this is a fall from grace or anything like that. But the so-called fall is not a fall, but a step up into self-awareness. So it's a step along the journey towards conscious awareness of our oneness with God. So we have this first self-awareness of ourselves as individual beings, and so there's all of a sudden we feel this separateness, that we are separate from each other. And there's that illusion, if you will, of separation. It's an illusion, it's not real. That we are all expressions of God. That we are all expressing God to our greatest ability. Again, going back to Wan Su, I was reading, my wife's going to use this story today about Wan Su having a dream that he was a butterfly and flittering around from flower to flower, and then he awoke and he remembered his dream and he said, "Am I Wan Su who had a dream I was a butterfly, or am I the butterfly dreaming that I am Wan Su?" Which is real? Are we? And then, as I mentioned, Adam never woke up. We're actually in the dream that we are separate from each other, that there's a separation. The truth is that we are all one. And as we hurt the other, we hurt ourselves. And as we bless the other, we bless ourselves. That there is no separation in consciousness. And that's where we're headed. None of us have reached that point yet. I don't know of anybody who doesn't think of their own selves first, If you think, we get up and we take care of ourselves, and then we go out and help others. That we have a consciousness of self. Some is more helpful, some is more beneficial, some is more, and some is more just destructive, or some is more constructive, some is more destructive. It's all relative. It's all a relative expression, and what we're shooting for is increasing our relative expression of that. And then we come into an absolute expression in the book of Revelations, where we have the balanced of our spiritual faculties, the 24 elders, and we are in conscious communion with God on an everyday basis. And really, I think that's our goal within this lifespan. If we look at Lao Tzu, if we look at Buddha, we look at Muhammad, we look at all the different traditions, it's about having a conscious awareness or living in a conscious awareness of God. And that's what these stories are showing, our soul evolution. And so next time we will take another step as we move out after we move out of the Garden of Eden, and so that'll be next time.